Let me get my volume up so everybody can hear me, because this mic is driving me insane. Anyway, I don't want to get too carried away with that. A good evening, everybody. On the YouTube side, I've got Gail Griswold with me here tonight, and I'm posing a question because it's human nature to blame our education problems, a lot of them, on the federal government. But we're going to delve into that a little bit because, I mean, a lot of us understand the state has some, we have some issues with our state, the way they run education. I think we're really going to dive deep into that tonight because, yes, the feds do, they deserve a lot of the blame. We got a lot of lawmakers, Republicans and Democrats in the state, who are also screwing up education for our kids. We're going to get into that and a lot more, so give me a moment. We'll start the recording, and then we will commence with a Freedom Talk.
In the restaurant of life, we're putting freedom back on the menu. It's the Missouri Liberty Report with John Williams, working with grassroots organizations and legislatures to make Missouri the freest state in the nation. Let freedom ring.
All right, folks, and we're back with another edition of the Missouri Liberty Report. Again, to all of those who watch the live stream, watch on YouTube, if you're viewing this on Rumble, if you do this on the podcast side, if you hear me on the radio side, and you support this show, thank you so much for your continued support. I've got a lot of great guests coming up. Just a reminder, next week, Jacob Turner will be with me, and then I want to there's another gentleman who is running for state rep, and I don't want to get his name wrong, because if I say it off the top of my head, it's going to be wrong. So his name is Bryant Wolfen. Found him on Twitter. He apparently is a big fan of Catherine and Kirby and myself, is starting to watch our, I guess he's watching the YouTube videos. But he is running for state rep here in Missouri. So he will be on with me the Friday after Jacob. So August 11th, I will be joined by Bryant Wolfen. I'm going to try to get Sam and Tricia on the 18th. And then hopefully follow up the end of the month with Catherine and Kirby. I still have to discuss that with them. But that's what we're looking forward to in the coming weeks here on the show. But my next guest, her bio is long. And I want to hit the high points because I don't want to take too much time away from her. But this is a heck of a story. And when we talk about people who get involved in their local area and the state level, this is what I'm talking about. So this is Gail Griswold. She's an entrepreneur, a mom, active in her local community. She first entered the public square when she questioned an unconstitutional state statute on lodging taxes that goes to trial the end of November. She ran for school board in 2021, is now the president of that school board. They immediately, her and the three other like-minded school board members, because they flipped that board, removed all COVID mandates, including masking, testing, secondary quarantining, and they became a beacon for schools across Missouri. It and then they also turned down $8 million in the America Rescue Plan ESSER 3 funding. And so basically, she's really speaking out extensively against the recent Missouri Education Omnibus Bill and ESAs, which are I believe that's the educational savings accounts in Missouri, that is causing problems for homeschoolers. And she's working to reduce the burden of the state mandates for school accreditation and free the teachers from burdensome daily tasks, something that we'll be getting into here in the show. She is a strong proponent for smaller class sizes, little to no technology-based learning, and trivium classical approach to learning. She is on the Camdenton School Board. I think we're all going to like what Gail here has to say, and I think we're all going to be really well informed and probably learn a lot of new things before this show is up. So, Gail, great to have you with me. Thanks for joining me tonight.
Thank you for having me, John.
Absolutely. So, I touched on your bio here, and but I guess the first question here is, what really, really drove you? I know the state of education probably, raised the hairs on the back of your neck and went, whoa, something's wrong here. But what are some of the key things that drove you to run for your local school board?
So, one little update to the bio, that that lawsuit for the lodging tax was ruled at the circuit court level as unconstitutional, but doesn't have quite the teeth that we were looking for, so it's on appeal. But I just wanted to give that update. I need to update my bio because November is past. But that case kind of came out in 2019, and I met a lot of people in my area. I got more engaged with what was going on locally, because I think I'm like a lot of people where we are guilty of being busy, working, raising our children, and not really paying attention, it's quite in depth as we need to on the local level in the state as well. And so I started to engage and see more, and actually it was right before the COVID, lockdown, where I was starting to get a little bit more educated on what was going on in our actual schools from what the leadership was doing, what the board was doing, and just started to question probably a month before the COVID lockdown. So when the lockdown happened, I kind of took a step back. I think everybody was, really, nervous what was going on. And then, after about 6 or 8 weeks, I think we're all, but people started to get back and start communicating and showing up for public meetings and get back to the questioning how things are operating. But definitely I would say that I'm one of you see it all across the nation, that started to get more involved during the lockdowns. And when in the fall of 2020, just looking back, it's already been 3 years. The fall of 2020, when our school decided to mask on the second day of school, they originally said that they weren't going to mandate or require it, and then the second day of school they changed their mind. I pulled my kids out immediately, put them in another school in the area, and turned around and said, I'm running for school board. And so I think there's a lot of people that understood why I put my kids where they were at. Masking, I was against that for my children. And then there were other issues that were internal for our school that weren't necessarily a national issue. But yeah, so I started to, just question how the board was operating. Lots of classic with the sunshine request, and I campaigned really hard. I campaigned on questioning taking grants and federal money, because I sunshined a grant and saw that it was tied to a research company in Virginia that is involved in so much of the questionable activity in education, and started questioning that data. Why is it going? Are you sure it's protected? Are our kids protected? all those kinds of things. And I won in the spring of 2021, like in my bio. The first night, the board, 4 of us, voted to absolutely go back to almost pre-COVID protocols, which was not COVID protocols, meaning we were not contact tracing anymore, and we were not doing secondary quarantine, and masks were optional. If you want to wear a mask, you want your kid to wear a mask, fine. I would say at that point, the teachers in the school and the community had really moved past it anyway, and it was time. Our hospital rates were extremely low, almost to zero, I think, and stayed that way throughout the end of the school year. So it was just time. So that's kind of the backstory. As far as what really got me engaged, I think I just said, I have to try. I have to try, to fix what I think I can fix. And, if I wouldn't have won school board, things might be different for my family, but I did win. The board is operating really well now. As far as moving past kind of reform and now looking at things that we can improve on daily. You still there?
Yeah, no. Listen, if I get quiet, I'm just soaking it all in. I don't want you to think I'm in outer space, because I have a lot to learn, and I know that. So when someone's talking on a subject, if you don't hear me responding, I'm Mr. Sponge. Yeah. I'm Mr. Sponge in the background. Just don't pay any attention to me. I'm learning.
So that's great.
It's the thing is when myself and others talk about, staying local, but, paying attention to what your state government's doing, paying attention to what your city council is doing, your county's doing, your school board's doing. I mean, this is a great example of someone who is, saw that there were maybe some shady things going on, and talking to Kim last week and hearing some things from others that, the school boards kind of rubber stamp things through without understanding what they're doing, which causes more, a lot of heartache, because, again, when you get this government money involved, there's always strings attached, and they don't quite understand. They either don't understand or don't care about the attached strings to the to these education funding and all that. But when you and I, because this is something I really want to get into, when you and I talked the other day, and I said something about the feds, and you said, well, you'd be surprised how much the state, Republicans and Democrats, have created legislation and regulation that has made it difficult for teachers to do their jobs. I really want to get into this, because I find myself in the same trap, the same mindset that, the feds are screwing up education. And at the state level, I always look at it as they keep throwing money at a problem and it's not solving it. But I've never really took the time to see what the legislators have done to education in the state. So I would like you to break down, maybe give me your top 3 or 4 things that you think are the most detrimental, either that have been a long time in the making, or some of the some of the things that have happened not so long ago that have really made it difficult for teachers in the state to actually teach things.
So, yeah, that's a great point. I don't think I truly understood that until I got on the board and started to pay attention to what was going on at the Capitol in Jefferson City. And I realized, oh my, these legislators have no idea what's going on. I just am learning the last couple of years, 2-3 years now. But when I go and I sit and I listen to the hearings and I listen to what they say, and I realize they really have no idea what's going on. And what I want to go back into history a little bit, and I didn't find this on my own. Somebody said to me, I'll have to give, who was the first person? I would say it was either Ron Calzone or Mary Byrne that said, you have to look at the 1993 Outstanding Schools Act, Gail. You need to look at that. And so I did a deep dive into archives, old newspaper articles, everything a couple years ago. And I found out that in 1993, and I think there's a generation before me. So I'm in my early 40s. And so I think there's a generation that, remembers 1993, what I'm going to be talking about. And some of them have either passed or they're tired or they gave up on the fight to challenge that. So in 1993, Mel Carnahan was the governor of Missouri. And he made it his legacy to pass this education act of sorts and through the state legislature. But it was triggered by a lawsuit and a judge ruling. So the lawsuit, I can't remember who brought it forward, but it said that the state, the way that it was spending the money that it's supposed to from the state for education, they weren't doing it in quotes an equitable manner. So what that means, well, first of all, I think in 1945, the Missouri Constitution, there was a vote of the people. There was a lot that was also passed in the 40s, post-war, or while we were during war, while the men were away and they were just shoving things through legislative. But the people voted for to fund public education 25% of state general revenue. So that is not federal revenue. Anything that comes from the Fed, that is a different box. So the state, let's say on average, I think the last few years, their budget's been $10 billion that is directly from state revenue. Well, 25% of that has to go, at minimum, they can spend more, but at minimum has to go to, quote, public education. Now that probably is defined now, college, different types of public education, but it has to go to public ed. So that funding was in question on how it was being spread to different school districts, K through 12, in the early 90s. And the judge ruled and said, yes, you're not spending it in an equitable manner, meaning you might have one district that has a base revenue that can spend $10,000 per student, and then a district next to it that doesn't have that maybe as strong as, I don't know, assessed value and doesn't pay as high taxes, who knows what, maybe not as fluent. So they're spending $5,000 per student. That's what their budget locally is. Well, the state needs to bring that up to an equitable playing field across the state. So they need to give that other district $5,000 so that they're, educating at the same level. Now, those are arbitrary numbers. Those are not the exact numbers. So don't quote me on that. But that's just an example of what was being questioned. And then the judge, I think that last name was Kinder. I can't remember exactly. But the judge said, I'm not going to tell you how to make it more equitable, but you have to make it more equitable. And what happened from that was there were lawsuits that were filed because of what was attached. Okay, so I guess hold on, let me backtrack. So the judge says, yes, you need to do this in the next 90 days. The state takes the ball and runs with it to the state legislature and says, hey, we have to do this. Well, with that judge ruling, they brought in a huge book of extra things with this act. And in 1991, Missouri had started the Missouri School Improvement Plan. You'll hear me talk a lot about MSIP. So in 93, when this was ushered in, MSIP was pretty much started to be on steroids, meaning that's where all the mandates, the burdensome teacher mandates, all the boxes you have to check. The state literally gave the State Board of Education sweeping authority to just make up rules and for standards and assessment. This is where you saw a lot of the assessment language for the first time. I am pretty sure, I'm 95% sure that Missouri was doing assessment and standardized testing per this act before the federal government even required it with their money. And so we have what's going on in the 90s with a large Democrat, stronghold across the United States. You're going to see a lot of 1993, like the 40s, the 90s, massive amounts a regulation just across the United States. So I always, when I hear 1993, I'm like, oh, that's the year of everything, all this extra chipping away of all of our rights. So the state legislature passed this with a Democrat stronghold and Mel Carnahan signing off. Well, the Republicans said 3 of them filed a lawsuit, and it was Todd Aiken, T. Mark Elliott, and I always forget the third guy's name. I apologize. They filed a lawsuit and said it goes against the Hancock Amendment. Hancock won the Hancock Amendment. And, not for vote of the people. It also required that states adopt, not states, local school districts adopt a 2.75 tax levy. And if they didn't, then the state, I found articles where it said the state could come in and say that you're not classified. We're gonna deem you unclassified if you do not take this tax to the vote of the people locally, and we can come in and take over school, close down your school, and send the kids to another district, and you still have to pay that tax. And I just was like, wow, so I don't think any school district did not adopt it, and so I don't think it was ever challenged in that way. I think they just said, okay, we'll take it to the people, and I think everybody voted for it. I'm sure it was sold in a way that, you have to, please vote. So you have the Republican Party that was very concerned about this act because they also thought that it was promoting and pretty much mandating outcome-based education. I found articles from Phyllis Schlafly that spoke heavily against outcome-based education. And what that is you're teaching to get everybody to the same outcome. So you're standardizing education. We've kind of gotten accustomed to it in the last, 30 years or more. Like we think that that's normal, all these standards and standardization, but education did not teach like that pre, 90s. It might have been a slow creep in different areas, but we have really gotten to where we teach the tests, heavy assessments, and all that stuff we can talk about more. So still in the 1990s here. The GOP, a little side note, the GOP used this act and all of their concerns with it to fundraise for the next election. They really used this as, and hopefully ethically so, it said, look how bad this is. We need to flip these seats. We need to get back in control. They're just doing whatever they want up there. And so they heavily fundraised. And so I found a lot of articles that this act specifically was like the number one, debate, a campaign topic, big topic. And it actually is what kind of, birthed the attempt to pass Hancock 2. Hancock 1, there's been, some workarounds. We saw that with the gas tax and different things. And so there was an attempt back in the 90s to pass what's called Hancock 2, which would have made it even more restrictive to do things like this. So the Missouri Supreme Court denied that, the lawsuit that Aiken and T. Mark Elliott that they had filed, and so they lost that lawsuit, and then just kind of fizzled from there. And the teachers and the schools and everybody had to start implementing what is required under the Outstanding Schools Act. So pretty much everything in Section 160 in our state statute is all of that. And so I start there because it's so hard to even explain what MSIP is. We are in our 6th version of it, and the State Board of Education will just come up with new things that check the box, and then maybe have a couple hearings, and then it's implemented. And the state legislature, they don't sign off on it or anything. It's just this, hey, we're rolling out a new version, and you can have a hearing, and you can write a letter, but there's no public comment, which I think is hilarious. How local school boards, how we have public comment, we get roasted sometimes, but the State Board of Education does not. You can't go up there and just speak your mind. I'll speak more on the State Board of Education later. That's a whole another ballgame, but I think it's definitely important to talk about. But so you have from the 90s until now just this massive amount of compliance, lots of compliance. And I always say, did our education improve in the last 30 years? Has it gotten outstanding? The Outstanding Schools Act, I think, is kind of funny. I'll stop there if you have any questions, or I can continue on.
Well, we've got a couple of questions from the live stream, and somebody am I too loud?
No, you're great.
Okay,
Sounds
sorry. But someone wants to know, well, Patrick's here, and Patrick from the Missouri Freedom Initiative. He asks, does the school board control the school in your district, or is it the superintendent that kind of controls the board?
So the school board controls, I guess if that's the right word that you want to use, the superintendent. And that is something that I ran on. You see that there, you just delegate authority to the superintendent. Now there, kind of think of it like a business. So I'm a business owner, and I have my GM. So I'm going to give him direction. I'm going to give him some autonomy to make the daily, operational employee decisions, but it is the direction that I'm giving him or her, right? And so that is the way that it's supposed to be designed. The school board should be giving the superintendent the direction, and that's it. So the superintendent should not be legally or technically controlling the school board.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And one other question is, do you regularly publish the bond and internal debt, or do people have to ask for that? Because I told you the other day, we had a school bond that we defeated here locally in April, and I believe that they do post some of the minutes, but I'm not 100%, and I should be better at this. Know that they publish their debt or anything like that. Do you guys do anything like that?
As far as it being on the website, I have to look. But we talk about it in our school board meeting. I mean, I was really concerned about the bonds that we owe, and they just what they call refund them, which what we would think would be refinance them. So do we? I wish I could answer that. Yes, it's on our website and all that information is there. But nobody should be hiding it. It should be ready available.
Yeah, that's for sure true. Well, yeah, and that's the thing, when you start talking about the legislature, as you've brought up, 1993 on up, some of these things, there's so much to get into. I mean, but when you say that teachers have to check boxes, can you explain that to me a little bit? I mean, is it as far as curriculum or certain criteria they have to meet? What are some of these boxes that they have to check before they can even begin to try to educate the kids in their class?
So what we have is the Missouri Assessment Program, and that's a MAP test. And so you have every school that wants their kids to do well on this MAP test, because you'll hear, proficient and advanced and basic. And so every school is held to this, how well did you all do on your MAP test? And so I'm sure you've heard, this school is only 30% proficient in math. Well, those numbers directly come from that one test given once a year, just a moment in time. And so what you have is you have teachers that are pretty much teaching to a test. And so they have these standards that are called Missouri Learning Standards. And many of good friends of mine and people that I have learned a lot from taught Common Core in 2013, 2012 time. And technically, got Common Core pretty much illegal, meaning that the state could not mandate Common Core into the classroom, but that didn't mean that the local schools couldn't pick up some of those types of they couldn't pull from Common Core. And so what we have is I guess when it was all playing out in the state capitol and when it finally hit the floor, I think it was like all things watered down and not a lot of teeth, but they created what's called the Missouri Learning Standards. And so standards are, okay, you want the first grader to be able to, add to 20 by the end of the year. So it's all these different benchmarks of things that you need to be able to do by the end of the year, and you'll be potentially tested on it. And you can't see the test. You don't know what's on the test. So you're just hoping that what you're focusing on that year is going to give them a good outcome. So remember when we were talking about outcome-based education, we are really just trying to get these outcomes for these students to perform on a test. Now, there are many great teachers out there that will go off script a little bit. They know that it's important for X, Y, and Z, but as well as try to hit this test. And so the check the boxes is they have to teach these standards all year long. And if you can't even print them off, there's no standards book. You go to the website and you start clicking around into DESI's website. So it's like you click this box and then this box, and so the teacher has to navigate all these standards. Now they'll bring in groups and task force, and they'll say the teachers are on it and stakeholders and different people, but there's never a school board member. We can't possibly be, know anything. We're not the experts, right? We're just the elected people. And so what the teacher has to do every day in the classroom is hit all of these benchmarks, teach the standards, do, whatever the school or the assessment, is coming through. We have multi-tiered system support. There's so many acronyms and so many things that a teacher has to do in 1 year. And just think of how long the school year is already. It's too long, and they still are overwhelmed in trying to fit everything in that year. That's how much there is. And what you'll have is the state legislature every year. The first time I really saw it in action was what you mentioned in my bio was the Ed Omnibus. And I was watching it fast track. It was Cindy O'Loughlin's underlying bill that was the way it was originally written when it was first filed, said that normally all the curriculum and resources and materials is decided by the local school board. Her original bill was taking that away from the local school board and putting it with the state. She said that it was for if your school wasn't performing in literacy. Well, we have this test that shows their literacy, which is a junk test. So we don't really know how well we're doing, but you're probably not doing well per that number. And so now the state's going to come tell you what you should be teaching. It's almost like the fox watching the hen house. Like the state is telling you what to do, measuring you, and then if you don't meet those marks, can take you over. And that's not good. That is not a check and balance thing. So the teachers have to do, so I think the standards are the best way to explain it. So the standards will drive curriculum. So the state is saying, oh, we're not telling you what curriculum to use, but here's a whole list of model curriculum that we that would go well with this standard. Well, of course, somebody's going to use that. And then the curriculum then drives what's called the resource. And I had to really get these terms down, and it wasn't my, my lane before, but a resource would be the actual, like the book, maybe the movie they're going to watch, the book they're going to read, the math workbook. That is their quote resource. Anyone listening that you keep kind of talk in circles, well, it's not curriculum, it's a resource, well, that's what they mean. The curriculum is, this is what we want to teach, and here are the resources that were used to meet this curriculum. But then the curriculum, the public schools are trying to hit these standards, not only because they're supposed to hit the standards, and then also to try to perform on a test. I mean, it is layered.
You
I'm gonna
know,
take a breath.
yeah, it's fine. Because I just want to interject one thing, and it seems to me, I mean, don't get me wrong. You know, again, as they say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I think some legislators have good intentions, but they don't look at they look at the intent, not the outcome. And I think it's like some of them are literally setting the schools up to fail so that they can then take more control over the schools, because it's like, oh, you're not performing well enough. We need to control the curriculum more. We're going to have to set more standards, all of these things. And again, with government, like we always say, they can't seem to come to grips with, hey, maybe we should just back off a little bit. Instead, hit the brakes instead of the gas pedal. Let's slow it down here a little bit. Let's back off. Let's ease off on these restrictions, even if it's just a experiment. Let's see how things go if we just pull some of these restrictions away. Because, with the No Child Left Behind from George Bush, and then Obama comes in and then he sees schools in low-income areas. What does he advise them to do? Oh, well, lower your standards so it makes it easier for them to pass through into the next grade or graduate. It's like you're not helping anyone. It's again, when we talk about education and a skill set, to get a minimum wage job once you get out of school, you have to have. I mean, tied into that is a certain amount of education and a certain skill set. And if the kids aren't getting that, they can't even get a minimum wage job. It drives me absolutely batty. But I do know that I had an English teacher in 7th and 8th grade. She was like one of my favorite teachers because she allowed us to write short stories for extra credit. At that time, I liked to write. I wasn't really great at it, but I'd write short stories, and I'd turn them in, and I'd get extra credit. I saw her years after I got out of school. She was still teaching, and I asked her how it was going because she was in another district, and I could tell that it was wearing on her. She said, I literally cannot stray one iota from the curriculum, or I've been told I will lose my job. And she loves teaching, but they're saddling her and saying, okay, well, you can only teach this, only this. If you stray, we'll find another teacher to take your place. And I think they're just literally sucking the joy out of teaching for a lot of these teachers. Because, I think a lot of people are like, well, they're not getting paid enough, and that's why they're not teaching anymore. I think it's more than that. I think, again, when you're having to teach kids to pass a standardized test so that your school will continue to get funding, that's a problem. Because this one-size-fits-all mentality that we see in a lot of bureaucracies, it never works. One-size-fits-all approach to any topic never freaking works, and yet that's the end goal. Everybody, and this, when you said equitable in the, from way back in the day, I mean, now we hear equitable and equity all the time. We know that's an awful idea. Anybody with more than 2 brain cells to rub together knows that when you use equity or equitable in a sentence with anything, the outcome is not going to be good because it's based on faulty logic. So in a school, if you have equitable outcomes or equity, it's going to fall flat on its face. It just doesn't, that type of system never works in anything at all. Somebody else had a question I want to get to before. Somebody wants to know, have you had any, has there been any influence that you've seen from the NEA on the board, if any? Have you seen any that they tried to influence anything from the NEA?
No.
Okay.
So at our school, so all schools are different, and we're more of a rural school. We're a large rural school, technically, 4,000 students. And I I have seen the NEA in the metro areas closer to St. Louis endorse candidates, but they do not do that outside of the metro areas that I have seen, because I think it would backfire because we lean more conservative. So an NEA endorsement is a campaign killer outside of the cities. So in our school, I think a third are NEA, a third are MSTA, and a third aren't even in a union. And the real reason why that they even join them is to have what's called personal liability insurance. And so we have to realize they're not just joining them because they want to be part of this large national agenda. And watching Randy Weingarten and watching I don't remember, is it Becky something over the NEA? They're awful. I mean, I do not think that, I would say the majority of the staff and teachers that I know would not carry that message that they're saying to our school. And if they are, it would not go very well. And so, like in our school, our teachers are our parents. Their kids go to the school. I mean, everybody is about that school. It provides 600 jobs, over 600 jobs in our area, almost 700. We are probably the second largest employer outside of the hospital in our area. That hospital is quite a bit larger. But, so you can't just say teacher union's bad, which, I mean, I'm probably one of the least favorite of the teachers union locally, but it hasn't been a battle. The only time I've ever had any interface with a teacher union rep was when a teacher needed to, they just weren't doing very well in our school, or they weren't doing anything criminal or wrong or abusive. They needed to get out of their contract and move on to do something else. And they negotiated that for them. And so I remember thinking, to myself, if you're in the union and you're a teacher, this is what you want them, this is what you have, or you signed up for. You want them to help you with that. Now, I totally get how unions operate and how, they can be obstructionist and all that kind of stuff. So I see a lot of the national celebrity types that run around. My non-favorite one is Corey DeAngelis, because he, first of all, doesn't have any children. And I don't think you have to have children to talk about education, but if you're really championing like hardcore and you're the face of it, I don't know, it's just kind of bizarre to me, but that's just a side note. Taxpayers can have a voice too. I totally get it, but that's just weird. But anyways, he just makes a big deal about the NEAs and the teachers union. So you have the right and the left, without getting to, just an easy political thing going on. So the left is saying it's potentially represented by the unions, at least in the mainstream from what we're seeing. And then the right is anti-union. Well, they're both fighting each other, and I feel like they're playing off each other, and whether they're doing it on purpose or not, but they're both wrong, and they are fighting each other and shifting, the needle one way or the other to bring in more regulation. The end game of everything that's going on that I see in mainstream is for one to give an appearance of popular support. Griffin, from like the 60s, he did a lot of talk about Marxism and communism. And I just watched one of his videos, and one of his biggest thing was the appearance of popular support. The people going around, parroting whatever it is from any angle, and they're giving an appearance of popular support to then usher in more regulation, more law that further chips away at our rights. And so the union, so that question is good, because all I hear is union, bad. And I'm like, that is the least, that's not the problem that we're having from my perspective. And I'm a conservative, I'm libertarian leaning. I do not see the union as an issue in 95% of our districts in the state of Missouri. We have over 500 districts. You only hear about the big ones that are doing things that I don't agree with. And so I get why people are upset. Absolutely. But you have to realize there are more of us. You just don't hear about it. You have to be, this is an alternative platform for information, right? So you can't get all your stuff from mainstream. That was a long answer.
Oh, no, it's fine. I appreciate it. I mean, when you hear the things about the teachers union in the media, like in Chicago, they're the highest paid teachers in the whole country, and every time they turn around, they're having a teacher strike, and the kids are missing school, and so on and so forth. It's like, okay,
that's bad. Yeah, that's bad.
But
yeah,
again, you look at it that way. Chicago's not a really great safe city either. They have a lot of, their crime rate's god-awful and everything else. And it's like, yeah, I understand your schools are probably, a lot of them are unsafe. You feel unsafe going to work. I don't know. Maybe when you go to vote and you vote for your mayor and your city council and all this, maybe you ought to change direction there, because some of that stems from the leadership in the city. I don't know. That's just me. Again,
I see that. Yep, I agree.
Well, and here's the thing. The factory that I work at is a union factory. I'm part of the UAW, okay? I know that the union has a few good sides and they have some bad sides. My problem with, like, teachers' unions is because they are taxpayer funded. Then I start having more of a problem, because sometimes they try to hijack stuff, and you're like, oh, okay. Now, you may not see that, again, every area is different, because I know in some areas they want to control the curriculum, and it wouldn't be such a bad thing if they were actually trying to affect a change that would bring better education. But a lot of some of this stuff is, transgender issues and all this stuff. It's like, hey, that should be outside the school. Leave that stuff to the families and the parents at home, and let's just reading, writing, and arithmetic, back to the basics. But
I agree.
That's my opinion. And somebody, let me.
I think people are tired of all of this outside, fringe things that are getting in the way of what we always have to say, what is education? What is the purpose of it? And when people say, oh, to create good citizens, I cringe. And I'm like, no, that is not your job, is to create a good little citizen to go out in the world to do, good little citizen things. It is to, actually teach them, grammar, and give them skills for them to figure out what kind of citizen they're going to be. So there's also the workforce training. So a lot of the Common Core, a lot of the stuff coming from ESSA is college and career readiness. And you hear all about workforce training, the chambers, workforce training, yes, and they start to commandeer in our schools. And I had to put my foot down with our local chamber and just say, look, we will work with you, but don't just think that the school is your playground. We have a great tech school, and I'm very protective of them, because I think getting extra skills and learning trades is great, but I don't want it to be to where it's compensating because we haven't educated them, right? Like K-8, are we educating them first, and then at tech school they're moving on? So you're gonna hear a lot at the state level about workforce training, a lot of funding for it. Parsons made a big deal about it. With ag and tech, and I'm very supportive of ag and tech, but I am not supportive of them using and commandeering our children to train them for industries that already exist, instead of having them work on being creative and maybe creating a new industry. Like, these kids are being trained for industry that already exists, and the corporations used to do that. But when we shipped all of our industry overseas, they are shut down, or they became more dependent on the government. And so is it our job to train a child how to work for that business, or is it that business's job? So there's a fine line there. I probably shock people when I talk about it, but it's only from reading historical texts and great, great writings of how I really worry about it, shifting into a communistic model with our workforce training. But go ahead, you had a question. I keep going.
No, you're good. You're good. You're good. Yeah. So, got a question. I'm going to try to say her last name. I'm going to imagine you know this person because she's pointing the question right at you and about a certain bill. Kristen Hafterchick?
Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So she's asking if you can talk about Carter's SB 89. Now, with that being said, I just want to give you a heads up because we can both get long-winded. I know we can, and that's fine. But I have just under 8 minutes before I have to clip for KEYK, and then we can continue the conversation. So once we get close to the mark, I may have to stop you for a minute, and we'll continue the conversation.
Okay. So Senator Carter was a freshman senator this year. She was one of the Common Core, the Moms Against Common Core fighters. So she has a good pulse on education. And she filed a bill that initially started out what was called the local control bill, meaning if a school was 75% self-funded, meaning their local revenues, not including state and federal, or 75%, then the idea is that they're not really benefiting from that equity model, so they shouldn't have to do all those band-aids. And they should be able to have an opt-out where they can pretty much basically opt out of the Outstanding Schools Act. They can get out of MSIP. They could do a different accreditation model. DESE, the state also does the state accreditation, does the accreditation for each school. Some states allow third-party accreditors. And so Carter's bill, it was SB 85, not 89, 85. And it started to move. It got bipartisan support, actually, because, it wasn't really a left or right issue. It was, hey, these schools need to breathe. We need out of this. We need to do something different. And it was starting to track, and a few of the Republicans actually filibustered her bill. Mary Elizabeth Coleman, Curtis Trent, and Andrew Koenig started to filibuster her bill that would have reigned in DESE for public schools. And so that was super interesting. Hard to watch. So hopefully that changes next year. But the bill will have a different form because there was one thing that was brought up, and that is the federal government. And that bill would have not allowed the state to still be in line with the federal government, meaning mainly on assessment. So the ESSA mandates that there be one statewide assessment, and her bill got them out of it. And so there's this waiver talk. Have you seen the recent news that 20 schools came together to try to do something different with assessment?
No, I hadn't heard that.
Okay, so basically her bill was getting us out of all the mandates for just like a lot of the burdensome stuff, a lot of the standardized stuff. A lot of the mandates. And it really we got a lot of traction. I think DESE was pretty concerned. I think they were working a little harder. I noticed that the State Board of Ed during one of their meetings was talking about how they need to be in the Capitol more and be educating the legislators more. And we all know what that means. And so I would continue to watch what Jill Carter does, and hopefully some other legislators that are starting to understand a little bit more what the plight of the public school is. Because while they're working on school choice and talking about it a lot, they don't say one thing about what's hurting the public schools. So you can do both. You can talk about school choice, and you can still talk about how to get the boot off the neck of the teachers and the districts and the public schools.
Yeah, unfortunately, Gail, I've taken trips with the gang of the Missouri Freedom Initiative to the Capitol a few times, and I have watched people we thought were going to be like Mary Elizabeth Coleman. We thought she was going to be all right. She's proven us wrong, and we've seen several so-called conservatives, especially in leadership, just absolutely crush outstanding legislation, which basically would lend freedom to not just a select group of people, but to everyone equally as the Missouri Constitution demands it. And I understand your frustration because the gold and silver bill, SB 100, I was at the Capitol, spent 12 hours up there, like pretty much the second to last day of the session, this past session, and listened to Democrats say the most ridiculous things, but that was thanks to that was thanks to the leadership on the floor, and they just let them run roughshod for an hour and a half, and then they went into recess, and that they killed the bill right there on the spot. And it makes you wonder, and you probably wonder this too, Gail, if they're beholden to the people that elect them, or if they're beholden to money in special interest from special interest groups. Because again, time and time again, I mean, I know there's been studies done on everything to do with education, and at some point there has to be a realization that throwing more money at it and creating new rules and new laws and all these things clearly isn't working. So why do you think they just keep I have a somewhat understanding why they do it. I think they do it because in almost every other facet of politics, when one side of the aisle does something, there's a more knee-jerk reaction from the other side. And then they have to do something a little more extreme, which causes the other side to do something a little more extreme. And it's just this pendulum of stupidity. I'm going to take up the last minute or so, and then we'll get back to it because I'm close to clipping here. But sure, it's this pendulum swing between left and right, as you were talking about a while ago, and things just get more extreme. There is no, maybe we should tone it down a little bit. No, it's this extreme to see, like it's like who can control the schools better than the other, and we can do a better job than the other side. And good Lord. All right, for those of you in the KEYK audience, thank you so much for joining me in this segment of the Missouri Liberty Report. Make sure you tune in next week for Jacob Turner. Don't forget to check out molibertyradio.us, mofree.org, and don't forget to check out Rogue Politics, which can be found on YouTube and hopefully coming to KEYK soon. So I've got some great guests coming up in the coming weeks, and I hope that you will be joining along with me on the radio to hear these great folks talk about all things freedom in Missouri. We'll see you next week. All right, so there was another topic that I saw in your... I just hung up on her. How did I do that? Now I got to call her back because I'm stupid.
You there?
Yep, I somehow hit the button. I went to move the screen off my phone to get back to your bio, and I just hit the hang up button. I apologize for that.
No problem.
Fat old man fingers screwed up again. So let's get into this. Here's something I saw in the bio that I want to get into. You've got DESE contracting with CDC to provide a 5-year grant for CDC Healthy Schools through nurses and PE teachers. Can you get into that a little bit?
So I have been following some national people that has been speaking about what's called the WISC model. And DESE has brought in more of the WISC model, components, more of them than California has. And that's when, things are a little scary if we're doing more of potential progressive things in California. So the WISC, it's WSCC, and it stands for Whole Schools, Whole Child, Whole Community. And they promote what's called wraparound services. So wraparound services is when you get the school-based health clinics in your school where you have third-party companies coming in and giving therapy for students, different types of services that go beyond grammar and math. And so it sounds great, right? It's, that's nice that they can get their, the therapist can come in and work with them, but it's the slow creep. So CDC also promotes WISC, and then you have these really questionable other agencies that are doing the same, like Planned Parenthood, CCAS. That's where they're bringing in the comprehensive sexual education. I mean, I could go down a really big rabbit hole of all this stuff, but basically, if you think CRT is bad, it's nothing on what's really coming in through social emotional learning. And again, it's hard to see it in your school. It's probably potentially worse in different areas, but you have to be able to understand it and recognize it. It's not always about, going to your school board meeting and raising, a ruckus. It's mainly like we need to be educated on these agendas that are fast tracking nationally, internationally. And Missouri is kind of usually one of the last ones to get it. But like I said, we do a lot of progressive things quicker sometimes than other states. So specifically, I was looking up a lot of the WISC model, a lot of what DESE was doing, and they have what's called Mo Healthy Schools. And it's kind of like an NGO. So there are so many NGOs running around the world with tons of acronyms, doing a bunch of stuff, and it takes a lot of research. So I'm just going to tell you that right now. So lucky for you all, I've already done it, and I can tell you about it. And so what Mo Healthy Schools is where they go to the teachers and the PE teachers, and they start to do conferences and basically indoctrination of, hey, this is where they're having PE teachers teach the comprehensive sexuality. And that has not happened yet in our schools, but it's coming if we don't stop it. And the DESE had already had a 5-year grant with CDC, but they just had, I think, 7 pilot schools. Well, I just went and saw a video of theirs, and whereas I think just 2 weeks ago, they were cheering at a meeting that they got their 5-year CDC Healthy Schools grant renewed. And that my jaw dropped, because when I got on the school board, the health department, the summer after we had gotten rid of the protocols, that summer, do you remember the CDC rental moratorium? Do you remember that, or the federal moratorium?
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Okay, and it went to the Supreme Court and all that. Well, that moratorium was using the same Public Health Act as the CDC transportation moratorium, and it literally. So I went to in those documents, and I went to the Public Health Act, and I went to the actual Public Health Act that it was citing, and it was a health act. I hate to laugh because so many people's lives have been ruined because of this stuff, but it was a health act that regulates bringing in insecticides into the United States. And so that is why, remember when Biden said, well, we're going to do it anyway, we're going to extend it, and it might not hold up to constitutional muster. It's because of that Public Health Act that they were citing for the rental moratorium. Well, they were using the same one, and I knew this already because I was watching it. And I get the local health department director, per direction from the state had definitely commandeered the schools. I mean, that is a whole nother historical thing that we all need to learn from and never let that happen again. But the health department emailed all the school districts in my county, so there's other school districts just within the county, and said, here's all the, things that you should do next year because of COVID and, whatever, mitigating risk and everything. And by the way, you have to put masks on your buses. You have to mask the children and the bus drivers per CDC federal order. And they attach the order. And our superintendent is since retired. We have a new superintendent now, but he sent it to me. And I think he knew that I was not going to be happy about that. And our poor bus drivers, when you hear about bus drivers, maybe that it was hard to get them, well, because we were forcing them to put masks on children and write them up, it was such a disservice to them. So I responded back to the health department and said, thank you for your advisement and information, but the CDC has no authority on anything that happens on our transportation budget or buses, excuse me. The CDC has no authority on what happens on our transportation buses. And it was crickets after that. We never got a call. Nobody ever knocked on the door, and we carried on our business. Well, so we all know what the CDC is capable of and how they're used as a weapon. And so now we have DESE that got a 5-year grant that now extends to the whole state for Missouri Healthy Schools. What on earth do you think CDC Healthy Schools looks like? So
a train wreck? Is train wreck the right answer?
Yeah. I mean, it's like, just imagine like a state like sanatorium for your school. You're bringing in all this, medical, pharmaceutical. You're bringing the whole lobby into your schools, and that brings me back to the State Board of Education. And if anybody wants to go and see who sits on the State Board of Education, you can go straight to their page and look at their bios. The president has been on for a very long time, and he is the medical lobby. He works for Truman Health, a previous senator and a previous House rep, but never an educator. Not that everyone needs to be an educator to sit on the board, but it's just a side note. And then another lady is a psychologist. Two of them are in the mental health. One has been on the board since 1993, just had maybe 1 or 2 years that when Greitens, I guess, did a coup on the board, I guess. That was wild, I hear. And then you have 2 people from Big Corp, or Big Data. So you have the State Board of Education. Of course, they're going to let the CDC go through a grant. It's just a grant, right? You don't have to take the money. Well, you have so many trusting people of the government, unfortunately, that a grant's a grant. Everybody wants a grant, right? Everybody wants to write a grant and get something out of it. And a lot of times they're fine. A lot of times the grants are fine. But I would say anytime you have a grant that's going into where children are with medical education, you need to read that grant. You didn't know what they're bringing in and what they're doing. So what they are doing is they're bringing in the WISC model. And so your school is going to get this grant for them to teach you about social emotional learning, about how to bring to the community. The community needs to be in your school. It's all about community. Well, what that means is the special interests are now coming into your school. Like I've talked about the chambers and whatever before. And you have to watch. The CDC has even its own WISC tool, and you can navigate classrooms in different ages. And of course, you go to the middle school one, and it has all of the, all the flags and all the communist fist posters and everything in the virtual classroom. And so you're just like, oh, geez, like these are the people that are trying to do their wraparound services. You have to be really careful with bringing in, and there's a lot of good people. There's probably people listening to this that work for the mental health places, and they're really convinced that there's a mental health crisis, and they probably get pretty frustrated with me when I challenge them on what that is, what that looks like. We're in more of a mental health crisis than 30 years ago. Like, how do you see that? And all of this to say that we have completely gotten away from educating our kids. We have so much junk from so many different ways, and the teachers. So now you have Coach Joe, who just wants to teach or just baseball. And so he's just teaching PE. He went to college for PE, but he really wants to coach. And so now he is going to be asked to teach kids how to put condoms on, like the most ridiculous sex ed stuff. And it just passed. The governor just signed it. I wish he would have vetoed it, but it was on a bill that had child care and all this other stuff on it. Holly Rader, a couple of times now, has passed where sexual ed and sexual violence awareness and different stuff is taught in schools. Well, you talk to any teacher or parent or third grader that is being taught about sexual assault in third grade now, that's not good. That you don't, there are serious issues, and you need to, train teachers and the staff and people what to look for. But you cannot just now cast a wide net over all these small minds about sexual violence, because of something that happened to potentially you or somebody else in their past. And so she recently carried a bill and put it on multiple things, Senator Rader did, where a task force will be created with a nonprofit and some other stakeholders and teachers for what they call family and parenting education in your health class in high school. It is now mandated. You now have to take it to graduate. So they keep throwing in, they put mental health and PE in the Ed Omnibus that Laughlin carried. So you have what is their intent? Who is behind it? Well, if you know anybody at the Capitol and they know who's lobbying for those bills, then you know what's going on. So the person, I was told, and I will say this with confidence on good authority, that one of the biggest medical lobbyists is the one that lobbied in favor and was out pushing this family and child, whatever, education in PE. So you have the state, quote, conservatives, just throwing more and more junk at the schools to teach without taking anything away. They're not taking anything away. So it's just, it's really hard to watch. And I hope that changes very soon.
Yeah, it's
I'll take a break.
Yeah, no, you're all good. It's disappointing because of the simple fact that it seems like it doesn't matter what side of the aisle it's coming from. When you're talking about third graders hearing about sexual assault, to me as a parent, I mean, both my kids thankfully are out of high school. They're done. It just seems like every time you turn around, they're trying to sexualize the kids, and it drives me.
Yeah.
It drives me insane. And
yeah.
I went off on a rant a couple weeks ago about this whole child trafficking thing and anything to do with that. And I asked the question again: how can we expect society and our world to survive when this is being done to kids? I mean, we can't expect civilization to hold up to this type of behavior. We really can't. You're taking the most innocent of us, and you're just absolutely corrupting them. I mean, some of these people want to start on this as soon as these kids get into school. It's like they're doing something. They make it sound like they're doing something great for the kids. They're teaching them something really useful, and it's like, no, it seems like you're grooming everyone. It seems like you'd rather, groom them for some creepy pedophile than to teach them some useful life skill, and I just don't have use for those types of people. Now, when you're talking about Holly Rader, everybody, if you're not aware, Holly Rader has thrown her hat into the ring for lieutenant governor, along with Dean Plocker. So there's two people we don't need in office as a lieutenant governor. So there's another one. In my opinion, you mark off the list and say, we don't need that creep in that high ranking of an office here in Missouri either. But somebody's asking a question. Because, people are bringing up the days that, when we were in school, that there were spankings for bad behavior. And somebody asked if the schools registered their assault paddles. But that has nothing to do with what's going on now. Let me get back in and see if I can find anything else in this bio that we could delve into a little bit. There's so much stuff in here. Good Lord.
Well, and that's just a list of the things that I speak on. Hopefully, yeah.
Okay.
On different things, yeah.
I have a question because Jacob Turner, when I talked to him on the phone a few weeks ago, he brought up that you and Stacy, I believe, had spoken at an event, and he could have swore that you brought up something about a test or something that teachers have to take, or is that information correct? I don't know. Maybe he's thinking of somebody else.
A test for what?
That teachers have to take?
Does he just mean like in general to be certified? Or do you know what the test was on?
I don't remember I don't remember. Mm-hmm. So okay. So you've got on here MARE, which is Missouri Association of Rural Education. Now, what is that group all about?
So they are kind of the rural version of MSBA. So you can be in both. So the State Board of Education gets to approve what groups do your training. The state legislature requires 18.5 hours for the schools to be trained on governance. Well, that's where you're taught that you should delegate all your authority to the superintendent. So that's indoctrination camp all the time. And I don't care, and I'll stand on that hill for sure. But there's only two groups that you can get certified your training from, and it's those two groups. So they're very similar. I would say MARE focuses more on the needs of rural communities and schools, and has more of an a la carte type service, different services it provides. And then MSBA, they have a bigger presence. MSBA would just be bigger and a bigger presence, has their own lobbyists. MARE does not have its own lobbyists. It has different lobbyists that it would work with. But interesting enough, the head lobbyist for MSBA is the son of the president of the State Board of Education. Just throwing that one out there. That's always an interesting one.
So I want to get your opinion on another, really the biggest, bureaucracy that we have in Missouri as far as education, and that's DESE. Because I talk a lot about how many people are employed by DESE, which their salaries take up a decent chunk of the education budget. Now, you don't have to answer this if you don't want to. That's fine. But do you feel like DESE as an organization, as a government entity, is too big and that we should narrow that down and make some major changes to the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education?
I am totally fine to answer that question. I absolutely think that DESE needs to be cut back into the smallest role possible. So they have way too many people. They're doing way too many things. A lot of it is coming from the federal mandates. They're just facilitating the federal, whatever programs available. But before the Outstanding Schools Act of 93, they had more of just an administrative role. So they could still be that administrative role. They could still provide, the certifications for the teachers and the superintendents that they have to pass. They could do, help to do, get the money, to different schools and how they manage it. But they are doing way too much. They're in the biggest building in Jefferson City. I think there are about 2,000 employees. That's ridiculous. That's a lot of government. And that's why I just feel like I'm beating my head against the wall sometimes when the legislators are just giving them more work to do. The conservatives, Republicans, everybody, they're giving them more work to do, more things, every law, everything that even if you think it's good, when you're having them administer, and then when it says the State Board of Education can promulgate the rules, it says that on almost every bill. So pretty much you're going to pass this bill about education, and then at the bottom it says the State Board of Education will promulgate the rules. So they're just going to write extra rules on compliance. And so our state legislature gives them more and more work, gives them more money, more power, more bloat, and not taking anything away. And so I think that DESE should be strictly an administrative role and not clearly what they're doing now. The head commissioner is the president-elect of the National CCSSO, which pretty much brought Common Core to every state in the United States. And they're just part of so much junk, so much. And no, DESE needs to be reined in. And Senator Carter had a bill last year that had bipartisan support to give more autonomy back to the schools. And it didn't go. So hopefully we'll see that track better next year.
Yeah, man, I'm gonna have to get. I know Jacob's trying to get me in. I know he's trying to get Senator Carter to contact me to set her up to have her on the show. I'd love to have her on to talk about bills like that, because if I can bring attention to them and we can get a lot of phone calls up to Jefferson City, maybe we make a little headway. Now, I'm not saying we'd get it passed in 1 year, but we can definitely maybe build some momentum, because I feel that I think there's a lot of parents out there. Now, a lot of them don't understand DESE as a whole, but they understand how screwed up education is. They understand the fiery hoops that, administrators, teachers, everybody has to go through all this crap in order to just teach their kids. And a lot of them, most of them don't want any form, if any minimal sex education. They'd rather do that in the home. And so many of these other things, they would rather just say, hey, I can handle that if you can just teach them, the skills that help them strive in college or tech school or whatever they're going to do, or just out in the workforce, and, let us handle everything else. But again, with COVID, which I know is part of the reason you did what you did, that COVID and the kid or the parents being at home, their kids being at home, seeing and hearing what they're being taught, pulled a lot of them out and said, all right, screw that, we're homeschooling. I think that could help in legislation like this. But again, we do have a lot of people that think you have to have this huge administrative oversight in schools without understanding how much of the budget that they suck up, and that, again, their rules, their guidances aren't really doing anything to help the cause. It's just another, as you said, a bloated organization, adding bloat to the schools. But in the long run, they're not helping anything out but themselves, because they seem to, it gives them, it's like make work for them. They it gives them a reason to exist. It gives them a reason to have a job, and then they can just continue to add to their budget and add more administrative overhead.
A lot of
okay. Let me ask you this, because this I don't understand this. Even at the schools, you have, like here in our school district, we have a superintendent. We have an assistant superintendent. They have staff. Then we have, principals, vice principals, or assistant principals, and then they have staff. Is it too much? Do you look at the administrative side of just a local school and see that maybe it's even too much? That there's just, because I know a lot of superintendents make a six-figure salary. Several, even assistant superintendents, make a pretty good salary. To me, it looks like too much administration, and that just builds up a lot of extra overhead for salaries. To me, it seems a little much. What is your opinion on the size of just administratively in a lot of these local schools?
I think, administrative size and budget and everything has grown, and it's grown because of the state mandate. So if you scale back,
whoa. Hold on a second. Did you say that's a mandate from the state?
No, I mean they have to. Sorry,
okay.
All the compliance that needs to be checked the box, filled out paperwork, all the standards, all the mandates that the state constantly puts on new ones. Who's going to implement those?
Okay. Okay.
Sorry.
No, you're fine. I just wanted to make sure.
If you take all that regulatory compliance, if you take all of that made work for the local level to do, they're creating paper pushers at the local level too. And so, I think that the administrative, in general, like for my school, they make pretty good money, but I see what they do. And, in the corporate world, your CFO, your COO, your CEO, your director of human resources, they make pretty good money. But they're also doing a pretty tough job. And so I don't of course I don't want to pay people a lot of money for anything. That's just, you want to save the money for the district as much as possible. Absolutely. But you also want the best for your district. But I will say that if you had less compliance that the school had to do, less paper to push, you could reduce that cost. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to clarify that because I wanted to make sure that I didn't want to put out bad information. I didn't want to mislead anybody.
I apologize.
Oh no, you're fine. You're fine. We got to clear it up, and that's great. And I do see the point. It makes a little more sense to me because when you're looking at it like me from an outsider, I don't understand all this. I don't know all this information. So when you're just on the outside looking in, you're like, good Lord, how many principals, vice principals, assistants to this and assistant to that and staffing do they need when you don't take into account the amount of the amount of BS that they have to go through.
The federal, all the Title I, Title this, IDEA. One of your assistant superintendents is just managing pretty much the federal regulations and compliance. It's crazy.
Okay, well, I've got another question here. It says, do you believe that the school is controlled locally or possibly federally by federal grants and funds?
I would say that as much federal, I would say that they're all controlled by the federal government in every state right now. More than local control, absolutely. Because when the states take federal money, the states have to abide by the federal regulations. So that is the only reason why we have to do federal things like ESSA or what would have been No Child Left Behind. The only reason why the states and the local communities have to do those things is because the state has taken their money. It's not by law. So, say the state didn't take the U.S. Department of Ed's money just for education, they would not have to put those mandates and compliance measures on the local schools. They wouldn't have to do a statewide standardized tests. But ironically, the ESSA does allow an opt-out, and that's why the 20 people are trying it. Our state, there are other states. I think Montana is getting pretty good about getting away from the standardized testing from the federal government, giving them, quote, a waiver. And so, but our state has been, holding on to their, everything close to their chest and, just won't give up the control. And we hear a lot about accountability. Well, there's got to be accountability. Well, yeah, but how far does that accountability go? And who is the one that's overseeing accountability? So as much as I would like to say that we are locally controlled, in a lot of areas we are, but as far as what we're actually teaching and teaching to a test, that's the Fed.
Well, I understand because half of our state budget comes from federal money, so they're not. Missouri does not. These guys do not want to give up. Well, I shouldn't say these guys. A lot of them do not want to give up any federal money, and that's been a fight that that's a battle we've been fighting for a while now, is trying to get them to understand that, hey, we don't need all this federal money because of the strings attached, whether it's, education or some type of other industry. If you're taking the money, there's going to be some mandates involved with that money. The feds do not just give you money and say, hey, enjoy, have yourself a party. No, there's going to be some awful things coming down the pike with that money involved. Well, Gail, we've been in an hour and a half here. Is there anything else that you would like to bring up or discuss? And before we end this, whatever time we end this at, I would love to have you back on just to expand on more of this stuff in the not too distant future. Just to kind of give you a heads up, I'd like to expand on this a lot more because I myself have a lot of learning to do. But is there any other topic you'd like to bring up before we end the show this evening?
Yeah, I would like to talk about school choice just a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
And just in the fact that we're seeing a lot of it, school choice. And I never really engaged in that arena. I saw myself as sitting on a public school board, and probably wouldn't be appropriate for me to talk about it. And then I started to learn more about it, and homeschoolers were upset because they were writing, again, the treasurer could promulgate the rules. So when you read a bill and it says so-and-so department will promulgate the rules after this passed, that's a big red flag. Sometimes they have to. Somebody's got to write the rules and manage it, fine, but just really watch that. So for me, let's just say from my own perspective, there's a difference between educational freedom and what school choice is being promoted as. And I see legislation and ESAs and charters and different things. I don't see that as educational freedom. I see that as expanding government into private and homeschool. So like we were saying, there will always be, quote, accountability and strings attached when you insert government funding. So I have not seen legislation or anywhere that looks like a great school choice model. And people don't like to hear that, or they're saying I'm just protecting public ed. And it's just, I would love to see a model where you could go take a voucher and go to a school and do whatever, and that would be great. But when I read more about them, what comes with them, what the agendas are, all of these independent schools and charter schools, the charter schools in Missouri on average are way more progressive and doing way more things than the average public school in Missouri, hands down. I can prove that. A lot of the anti-racism and critical pedagogies, all the things that all the things you think are happening in public schools that are very well are. I'm not denying that, but are on steroids in some of these, quote, school choice organizations. So I just caution people. It's not that no school choice. It's just, what does that look like? What does that law look like? How does that money transfer? And what's the compliance measures now for that school or for that student now that the government has been interjected? I would say that everyone probably, one of my favorite homeschool, Nikki Truesdale, she always says we have to protect homeschool because at the end of the day, when the government's controlling everything, everybody will want to homeschool, meaning everyone will want that educational freedom. So make sure that you are truly protecting educational freedom when you're writing all these laws. Because it'll be like, hey, this great school choice bill. Well, we've seen how these bills work and how they get watered down and messed up. It'll be the anti-school choice bill, really. It'll be government in your homeschool bill. So I just am cautious, just be very careful. While we're also talking about school choice a lot in policy and government, don't forget to help public schools get away from the state and federal regulatory agencies as much as possible, because they're the ones bringing in the stuff for sure. All the stuff that you question, guaranteed. So that's just where it is. I'd love to come back and talk about some of the other things I have on my item that are more like specific ideologies and theories that are being pushed in education right now.
Okay, well, I've got another question here real quick.
Mm-hmm.
We want to know, are you allowed to talk with parents directly, or are you discouraged from doing so?
So any school board member can talk to any member of the public at any time they want, legally. So we are all citizens of the community, and we can talk to whoever we want at any time, just so you know that. So I was never discouraged because we kind of came in like a lightning rod and we flipped our board, and so we never really had that anyone telling us not to. I can't remember in the training if anyone told us not to. So legally, like I said, anybody can talk to anybody. I remember talking to my attorney one time saying, I was talking to this one person and, and I think I can do that. And he just started laughing and he said, Gail, you are a member of the public. You can talk to any member of the public. Now, the things that you have to be careful about is talking specifically about an employee, right? So you have to put your, like owner, employer hat on a little bit. So you can't just be, talking about teachers. You can listen to them talk about the teacher to you and say, so-and-so is doing this or whatever this. And you listen to them and you say, well, I'm going to check into this. I'm going to go talk to so-and-so and, go from there. So you definitely have to be careful how you handle personnel manners. For sure. And children, if you're talking about somebody else's children and not the person that's talking to you, absolutely, you need to be careful there. But you can talk to a parent anytime that you want.
Awesome.
Does that make sense?
Yes, ma'am. So, again, Gail, I really appreciate you coming on, taking time out from your busy schedule to join me tonight, because I've learned a lot. And again, I'd like to have you back on in a not too distant future to talk more education, because as these things, as we watch the world go by, we see in the media, we see what goes on in some of these school districts. It makes me want to know more, and I know my audience wants to learn more. And I appreciate all your input and your experience in this, because there are a lot of people who know a lot about education, but I enjoy talking to somebody who's literally, you're on the board of education in your school district in Camdenton, and I couldn't, it's kind of hard to find anybody better to talk to about education than someone who is, that's part of their job, part of their daily life, being on a school board. So, again, thank you so much for your time tonight, Gail, and I look forward to talking to you again real soon. I'll try to stay in touch with you, and maybe we can come up with another date to have you back on soon.
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate your time. Have a good evening.
All right. Thanks, Gail.
Bye.
All right, everybody. That was Gail Griswold. Great show, great interview. And, again, we have to appreciate folks like her who are willing to put on a T-shirt and really get involved in really educating herself on the issues. She knows a lot of the history behind education, so definitely want to have her back on again. Well, folks, that is going to do it for tonight's episode. I just had a brain fart there. I just had a Mitch McConnell moment. That's not very nice. I'm sorry I said that. No, I'm not. Okay, maybe a little. But anyway, next week will be Jacob Turner. And then the week after, I forgot his name again. Let me look it up. Dun, 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 'cause I'm having... Oh, Bryant Wolfen, who is running for Missouri State Rep next year. Apparently, he has been checking out Catherine's podcast, Rogue Politics. He's also been, I guess, listening to my podcast. Now, I'm judging by his, what I see of him on Twitter. But he does seem to be a pretty, fiscally conservative, liberty-oriented person. And so, again, I'm looking forward to that interview because that's someone new that we can talk to. And maybe if this person wins their election, that might be another friend that we have in Jeff City when we're, trying to push through good legislation, or, an ally in killing bad legislation. We need as many of those types of people that we can get. And again, I know some of you probably heard me heard me interview Jacob Turner before. You're going to like this guy too. He's around the Cape Girardeau, Joplin area. You're going to want to hear this guy. He is running for state senate, and you're definitely going to like what you hear from Jacob. Jacob understands. Now, Jacob ran for Congress before, and now he's decided to run for state office. He came to an understanding that that he could do more here in the state than he could at the federal level. So he's putting a plan into action. He is going to be campaigning. Well, I think he's already is. He's spoken at some events that Bill Eigel has attended and all these other things. So, yeah, Jacob's a great guy. And hopefully Mr. Wolfen is as well. All right, folks, don't forget to check out KEYK Radio. That's keyradio.live. Don't forget to check out MOLibertyRadio.us, especially on Sunday nights from 6 to 9 p.m. Central Time. Sam and Trish Britton, Off the Cuff Radio. Also, don't forget to check out mofree.org. Sign up for their email list. They will be another live stream tomorrow night on Odyssey. Look for Missouri Freedom Initiative tomorrow night at 7:30 p.m. All great, a lot of great content. Also, don't forget about Rogue Politics, Catherine Dreyer and Kirby Lane's podcast. If you want to follow the money, these two are it. They are on it. They are about it. They nail it down. They have a great show. And then they do, You Might Be a Criminal, and they pick different, cities, and they go over some of the dumb ordinances and things that they have. So they inject a little humor and a little fun. I mean, it's not funny, but it is funny, especially listening to them talk about it. It can be quite humorous. But with that being said, thanks to all of you who joined in the live stream. Again, to those of you on the podcast side, for those of you on the radio side, all of you who listen in, join along, and support me, I really, 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 really appreciate each and every one of you. And so, yeah, that was a great guest. So there's another person I'm going to look on having on. Let me make sure it's Linda. Linda Retzel, I believe. She had been fighting for years to get, I believe it's shared parenting legislation through. And they finally got it through this year. And I want to have her on to talk about her fight to get this legislation done. So I'm hoping to get her on in the next, few weeks because I think more people need to talk about their experience as far as the battles of getting good legislation through in Jefferson City. With that being said, thanks to everyone who joins along, and those of you who support me. Again, greatly appreciate each and every single one of you. And we'll see you right here next week on the Missouri Liberty Report. And I'll be joined by Jacob Turner.
Want more freedom? It starts with you. Join us next week on the Missouri Liberty Report and find out how you can get involved to take back your state.
All right, folks, that was a heck of a show. It was a great show. Gail was a great guest, and she brought a lot of information. I'm going to actually have to go back and listen again, because sometimes when I'm talking and I'm trying to form a question or on a topic, sometimes I miss information, so I'm going to have to go back. And I hate listening to myself, but I'm going to have to do it. I don't have much of a choice. But so, Wilderness Gal, Gary Ride, Warrior Class 3, Patrick Holland, Misty Atkinson, Voodoo Queen. Who else I got here? We had Jim. We had Kristen. We had Grant. I believe Casey Rich was in here. John Doe. Who else did I miss? Did I miss somebody else? I hope I didn't. Let me make sure that I didn't. I'm just scrolling through the chat was lively now. Oh, Tom March was in here. Yeah, Tommy boy. The chat was very lively this evening. It's a good lively discussion. Anyway, everybody, have a great night. And we'll see you next week right here on the Missouri Liberty Report.